Welcome to the Commentary Magazine Daily Podcast. Today is Monday, April 15th, 2024. I am John Podhoretz, the editor of Commentary Magazine, and we have a full house with us today to deal with the unprecedented events of the weekend. That is Executive Editor Abe Greenwald. Hi, Abe.
Hi, John.
Senior Editor Seth Mandel. Hi, Seth.
Hi, John.
Media commentary columnist Christine Rosen. Hi, Christine.
Hi, John.
And Washington commentary columnist Matthew Continetti. Hi, Matt.
Hi, John.
Okay, Iran launched hundreds of offensive weapons at Israel, drones, cruise missiles, ballistic missiles on Saturday, and 99% of those missiles failed to reach a target. One missile hit Amman, one missile hit ineffectively an Israeli Air Force base in the south, and one either shrapnel, some version of discharge from a missile, critically injured an 8-year-old Bedouin girl in the south of Israel. And other than that, the attack was entirely ineffective. So, Seth, you have a piece up on commentary.org about the world historical nature of the response to Iran's launch. You want to sort of lay it out?
Sure. Yeah. This is a coordinated attack and a coordinated response. And what I mean by coordinated attack is, even though it's one country, remember that all these missiles and drones and everything are set off at different times in order so that they all get to Israel around the same time. So that's an important thing to know, is that it wasn't sort of like an all-day thing where these drones were flying in every few minutes. They set off hundreds, and they were intended to just swarm at one time. So they set them off at different times from different places. It's like if two trains, the old school thing, two trains start at this time, what time do they meet, sort of thing. And then the coordinated response was definitely unprecedented, in part because you had the Arab nations involved, especially Jordan, willingly and openly saying what they were doing. And then afterward, you had the Saudis openly saying what they were doing, which was shooting down projectiles that went over their airspace. And for in the Jordanian case, it was scrambling jets. This was first. There's two significant parts of it. The first is just that the West was ready for this and put it together, and it worked, right? I mean, there wasn't a ton of lead time, but this was similar to a NATO type response. Okay, British jets, the Royal Air Force, scrambled into place. American jets were put into place. Jordanian jets did what they needed to do in their airspace. Everybody did what they needed to do, and obviously the Israel Air Force and Israel Arrow missile defense system. So one is just that it was rather than everybody sort of supporting like an American attack on Iraq, when we talk about the Gulf War, for example, rather than everybody just saying, "Hey, the Americans, you can use our airspace." What actually happened was Jordanian pilots going up in the air, shooting down missiles, and then saying that that's what they did. That was the first thing, is just that coordinated nature of it. The second is that that they were willing to do so in an alliance, in a coalition with Israel. Israel's military was in the air. Israel's Air Force was in the air. Jordan's Air Force was in the air. The Saudis have been slightly more coy about what specifically they did, but they're obviously mobilized to do it. This was people saying, "Hey, we served in a war, essentially, alongside Israel." This is Jordanians saying, "We sent our pilots up into the air along with and in coordination with Israeli pilots to shoot down missiles that were headed for Israel to protect Israeli territory."
Matt, let's try to give people a sense of how you might say that April 13th, 2024 might go down in the histories of the Middle East based on what Seth just laid out. I mean, something happened here that was beyond unimaginable 20 years ago.
Well, I'm pretty sure that this is the first state-based attack on Israel since the Gulf War in 1991. That is, of course, Israel has been under attack uh, for many years, but mainly through Iranian proxies like Hezbollah, Hamas, and of course the Palestinian terrorist groups, PIG, and the Al-Aqsa brigades that were Yasser Arafat's favorite tool to kill Jews. So this is big because here you have an actual state attacking Israel directly. But it's even bigger than that because the state is Iran, which has never directly attacked Israel. So this is not an Arab state. It's a Persian theocracy. And that in itself is very significant, and it shows how the region has
and
changed.
nowhere near Israel's border.
Exactly,
it's very
right.
important. It's almost 1,000 miles
yes.
from Israeli territory.
So the drones and missiles
yeah.
had to cross over Iraq, Syria, Jordan. Some went into Saudi airspace, as Seth said. So a huge distance. So it's also important, I think, that there were other subordinate attacks at the same time coming from the Houthis, coming from the Iranian proxies in Syria and Iraq, and coming from Hezbollah. So even as Iran was attacking directly, its proxy armies throughout the region also were attacking Israel. And then, of course, you have the ongoing war in the Gaza Strip against Hamas and rising tensions in the West Bank. Israel's under assault from 5 different fronts, and it's all Iran. It's all coordinated. And so I think that's why it makes April 13th such a significant date. It's a geopolitical date. It's not quite the date of significance that October 7th is, the worst attack on Jews since the Holocaust, but it is still very important, and I think still very dangerous, even if this coalition was able to defeat or intercept 99% of the missiles aimed at Israel.
This was real quick, just to that point, because actually, John, your excellent nephew, Noam Bloom, reminded people that if somebody shoots you and you happen to be wearing a bulletproof vest, so you survived the shooting, that doesn't mean that the person who shot you is now like, okay, we're all good now. It's fine. Let's step back. And I think that's really important here because the Biden administration, whose Iranian policy was also proven to be completely impotent this weekend, has been starting to suggest that that's it. Let's all just take the win here. You know, we shot down all the missiles. That's not where we should be policy-wise.
So, Abe, of course, the crucial part of this alliance that Seth and Matt both delineated is the United States. So the United States announced that it was going to support Israel, totally, and we don't know what that means precisely. Clearly, some American forces shot down some of the things flying from Iran. Probably massive amounts of intelligence support in terms of where the missiles were, telemetry, stuff like that, to allow Israel to shoot down the drones as they shot down the drones. There is some talk that the ballistic missiles, that one of the reasons that Iran may be reeling today is that the ballistic missiles that they fired were a failure, and that like most of them collapsed on the way. Like they didn't actually reach their targets, or they were duds, or they misfire. They went off in the wrong way, but they could have been interfered with. Their telemetry could have been interfered with by the United States using techniques and means that we don't even know exist. So the Biden administration did what it had to do on Saturday to help protect Israel and to be part of this, as did Britain. So need to mention that as well. But I mean, the 5 fronts were kind of activated with Iran directly attacking Israel for the first time. And there was an alliance of nations that rose up to defend them. And as Seth indicated, didn't just say, okay, you go and we'll support you and give you money, which is what happened in the first Gulf War, where we got checks from countries who claimed to be part of the alliance. They engaged and they fired things down that protected Israeli life. So just on that, what grade would you give the Biden administration on the attack itself?
Just on the attack, not on
Just on the attack. We'll get to the other stuff.
Conversations
We're going to get to
that took place right after or anything.
Well, we're just talking about this thing that's happened since October 7th, which is that logistically, the United States has had Israel's back. And every other way, the United States has not had Israel's back. So logistically,
I give it an A.
Okay, you give it an A. Okay, so we have now given the Biden administration an A on its behavior during the attack. So now we have to ask 3 different questions that we do not know the answers to, but why is that going to stop us from speculating like everybody else? What was Iran up to? What was Israel up to? And what was the United States up to? And maybe we could add in the Arab states. What were they up to? So the United States said don't. Biden said don't do it. And they did it. So was saying don't itself bad because it revealed American impotence and America's inability to simply raise its finger and say to the Iranians, and then Iran would go bad. Basically, we probably shouldn't do it.
Don't was horrible.
What?
Don't was horrible.
Don't was horrible.
No, but,
and I just want to add, and Biden made don't even worse by afterward saying to Israel, don't respond.
Right.
Well,
it's a double don't.
Right.
What was the
double
point of the first
Right.
don't?
But if we
You'll
isolate,
regret it.
right?
Don't make
But I
them
think
regret it.
there's worse to be said about the Biden administration,
Right?
and that is the question that Biden administration starts turning rhetorically on Israel. We're all here sitting here going, some of it may be real, some of it may be Michigan, some of it may be this political calculation. But it happens, and we go crazy with the food aid workers getting shot in the convoy and, start talking about changing policy and all of that. So aside from don't, what kind of message did that send? Did the Iranians, how
Daylight.
plausible is it to think?
they fear
The
it.
Iranians thought that they had a free shot.
They saw daylight between the United States and Israel. That's what's been going on for the
Right.
past several weeks.
Right.
And Biden fears
right.
escalation more than he understands the role
the
of
don't
the US.
thing reminds me of this great Robin Williams bit from the 80s where he was talking about the police in countries where there are no handguns, specifically Britain. And he was saying, what do the cops even do in London? They shout, "Stop!" Or I'll say, "Stop again." that is
Right.
the United States right now. Don't. Or we'll say, "Don't again."
Yeah, and it's
Okay.
also they as we spoke about on the podcast last week, there was a downside to Iran doing this. There was a strategic risk to Iran doing this in a situation where they might not be successful at all. And we had been saying this, that the Biden administration was kind of not encouraging Iran to attack, but encouraging Hamas to walk away from the table, let's say, in the negotiations over the ceasefire and the hostages. They were doing things that were incentivizing behavior that would come naturally to the Iranians. And yet, at a certain point, if you're Iran, you want to maybe not test that further, that if everybody is already basically making your arguments for you at the table, you want to push your chair back and just listen and just let it happen. They did this anyway. So they were emboldened enough to say, we don't expect this to blow back in our faces in any significant way, even if we can shoot hundreds of missiles at Israel. And we don't expect that to change the Biden administration's willingness to hit Israel more than Hamas on the hostages. And, nothing about the negotiations. They don't see anything about the negotiations changing. in the wake of firing hundreds of missiles directly from Iran to Israel.
Okay, so let's go back. Let's continue to focus on the Biden administration, because a couple of things also came out this weekend, not related to Israel, but that I think also speak to Biden saying don't. And then this thing that Christine just said, that the Biden administration's policies, when it engages with and supports wars of survival on the part of two allies, one being Israel, the other being Ukraine, is to fear escalation. And the fearing of escalation becomes a critical element of the policy as it is being made, rather than the goal of the ally and how to facilitate and best achieve the goal of the ally that you are supporting, which would rationally be what would be your focus. You think Ukraine should win the war against Russia. You think that Israel should destroy Hamas, but you are fearful of escalation. And then everything that you do to advance the cause of your ally is then run through this program
appeasement calculator.
Yeah, that says, what kind of escalation will this lead to? So we'll do some, but not all. We'll do we'll take half measures, and then you extend the conflict. You muddy the waters about what it is you are and you are not willing to do to the adversary of your enemies. And thereby, though you are not morally responsible for that, you are a participant in making the wars worse, because you got in it and then you didn't fight it to win it. And we have this now, Abe, we have this Saturday night, Sunday morning, we have Biden saying, you won, stand down.
I just want to make, before we talk about that,
Yeah.
I just want to make a point to distinguish Ukraine and Israel on this escalation ladder you're talking about. We spent the first couple minutes of the podcast discussing this coalition and how it acted and how successfully it acted. If Iran had a nuclear weapon, that coalition would not exist. Russia has nuclear weapons. Is there a coalition defending Ukraine from the swarms of drones and missile attacks that it faces every day for the past 2 years? Not at all, because the presence of the coalition forces is thought to be escalatory, and you don't want to escalate vis-a-vis a nuclear power like Russia. In this case,
that is an incredibly important point, but I wanted to, because I forgot to use the detail that I wanted to mention as part of the things that we learned this weekend, that it has now been confirmed in Ukraine, which is not just escalation, but then goes to the cynicism of the Biden administration's pursuit of these policies, which we've seen in the Dearborn, Michigan fear, and the fact that, the Democratic Party's youth is so hostile to Israel or whatever, that Kamala Harris explicitly told the Ukrainians that America did not want them to fire on Russian oil refineries, and they should not do that. The one thing that in the case of the frozen conflict in Ukraine, that the Ukrainians have been able to establish a new kind of beachhead at, which is to say to the Russians, the more you engage us, the more we are going to effectively, cleverly, and innovatively interfere with your infrastructure and your export economy and hurt you. And now the American administration is telling them, for naked and stupid political reasons, the idea that this stuff might cause an increase in oil prices. They're telling Ukraine to stand down in the one military success that they are having at the moment. Similarly, Israel has to retaliate against Iran. I mean, it has to retaliate against Iran. Iran fired hundreds of missiles at Israel, and if an Israeli defense system had malfunctioned, thousands of people could have been killed. This is not, it's not that the bulletproof vest is a very good analogy, but it doesn't even matter. No country sits and says, okay, you were punching I mean, I guess if you're Jesus, you turn the other cheek.
Well, but this is also not. We should add to the confusion. Iran is also in a kind of alliance with Russia, with China, with North Korea. I mean, the Russians are relying on some Iranian drones in Ukraine. We know this. Like that, there is a coalition forming that should concern any American president. Should It's again one of the communication problems is that when Biden does talk about these various conflict zones, he does it in isolation rather than connecting the dots. We are seeing more and more a connecting of the dots among these very dangerous regimes.
Just to John's point here, I want to get back to the don't for a second. The don't was terrible, first and foremost, because it was completely ignored, right? Biden said don't, and our enemies and the enemies of our allies didn't listen. Okay. The whole point of the don't, though, way Biden, the implication was don't or you'll be sorry. If you do it, there'll be a price to pay. To now have Biden say to Israel, stand down, don't, not essentially, don't fight back, is to undermine his initial threat. Right? A threat from the U.S. So not only is it terrible for Israel, because of course Israel has to respond, because if Israel doesn't respond, then Tehran thinks rightfully that they can just do this whenever they want. The U.S. will tell Israel not to fire back because they're scared of a wider conflict. So of course Israel has to fight back, but the U.S. has to unleash its allies, because if we tell the foremost terrorist state in the world not to do something or else, and then they do it, and then we protect that terrorist state, we are dead in the water in terms of power projection. It's ridiculous that we mean nothing. Okay.
So yeah. Oh,
can I just say about deterrence and don't? My friend Matthew Kronig, a professor at Georgetown and a scholar at the Atlantic Council, he put a very elegant definition of deterrence on Twitter this morning. Deterrence, he said, is the credible threat of escalation held in reserve. The credible threat of escalation held in reserve. So by that definition, who is being deterred? Us. It's Iran's credible threat of escalation held in reserve that is determining our actions from the very beginning. And that you can't be a superpower and cower like that. And that only leads to a more dangerous situation in the long run.
Okay, so Iran, here is the mood. 36 hours after the strike was concluded. Where are the statements of international condemnation of Iran for launching hundreds of missiles at Israel? Like, the ordinary thing would be...
From the Saudis gave one.
Right, but we would be organizing at the State Department under a normal administration, country after country after country after country saying, Iran has done something that violates every international norm, every this, every that, every the other thing. They must be condemned. We would call an emergency meeting of the Security Council to discuss Iran's action. We would be organized. I'm just talking about...
You're saying the G7 doesn't count?
What did the G7...
The G7 issued a statement yesterday. You're not on top of the latest communiques from the G7, John?
No, because all I'm noticing is New York Times headline this morning. World leaders urge restraint as Israel weighs retaliation against Iran.
Yeah.
No,
right.
There is no focus on the fact of what Iran did. Iran did something that hasn't happened before, and as a general rule, doesn't happen in the world hardly ever.
Right. Well, they're supposed to be. I mean, besides statements, there should be an immediate emergency meeting of the Security Council that comes out with its own strong resolution, and then there should be discussion immediately of sanctions. This was not, because this was not just Israel on the line. You have to also defend your allies who stuck their necks out for this particular coalition. So you have to do something to deter Iran from doing this again. That part of the problem with the don't thing is that you can't let the Saudis and the Jordanians hang out there in a situation where you allow the discourse to sort of make light of the Iranian attacks, as if it's like, oh, look, they shot a bunch of missiles. It didn't work. Let's move on. Because if Iran thinks it can do that again, what the Sunni Arab states are hearing is that, well, they're also a target. The Iranians know that they were part of this coalition. They're going to get shot next time too. That's what they're telling Biden behind the scenes. That if Iran will aim and fire over our territory at Israel, knowing that some of these missiles will fall short and land on our territory, right? Then next time they'll make sure a few more of them actually land on our territory. They have to do something to say, you guys weren't stupid following our lead and trusting me when I say, all right, everybody up in the air, let's go defend Israel.
I think what we are looking at here is an American policy so incoherent that it is unable to have the President of the United States address the American people on the fact that America engaged Iran militarily. Let's not just talk about Israel engaging Iran militarily, or the Saudis engaging Iran militarily, or the Jordanian, all of which are unprecedented and fascinating in their own light. We engaged Iran militarily. We shot down hundreds of drones. We used our military in an effort to strike. The Iranians struck an ally country. The president, it was said, was going to speak. Then he didn't. Nor has he said a word.
He did return from the beach. He did come back from the beach. So we know it was a serious weekend.
The sacrifice, I agree. That was an enormous sacrifice. He had to interrupt the recirculation of the blood in his body, or whatever happens in the basement of the house.
What's the Barbie? What's the Ken thing in Barbie? My job is beach.
His job is beach. So he actually took on a new job, and going back to the White House, he hasn't said anything. His policy toward Iran is shredded. There is no policy toward Iran anymore. He cannot realistically expect to continue whatever the hell negotiations and softenings that he wants to play with Iran after we shot down Iranian drones and missiles. I mean, you could maybe negotiate stuff afterwards, but it's not the negotiation that he and the remnant of the Obama administration want to pursue, which is some form of appeasement toward Iran to get them to sort of, I don't even know what anymore. It's not clear to me that they have a specific goal in mind with their negotiations with Iran. But Iran has just proved itself to be a destabilizing actor. And remember that we are now being told that we should frame this as follows. Israel flies planes into Damascus and hits a site at an Iranian complex. The site is the headquarters of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps. It's, I don't, what do you call that? It's sort of like the Marines of it's the elite force that does offensive operations. It is the terror center in Syria, where Iran is guiding its proxies or giving advice or whatever to Hezbollah, to Hamas, to PIJ, whoever they're dealing with. So
and
they hit
unlike the Marines, they also, by the way, have a key role in the command structure as well, like in actually planning and
right.
telling people how to execute terror attacks and things like that.
Right. So Israel hits this thing, which is not part of the embassy. So it does not have diplomatic immunity. They kill 4 people, including some general.
Yeah, it's a military target. It's a legitimate military target.
And it's ordered in the middle of the Hamas war. They're taking out command, control, and communication sites, and one of them was in Damascus. Can Iran respond? Sure, like it's a war, so they can respond. They responded with an existential assault on Israel itself, and that's considered Israel's. Israel killed 4 guys. Iran fires ballistic cruise and drones at Israel in the hundreds, and now they're square?
We haven't mentioned the other great Biden quote from the weekend, which was the reporting that he told Prime Minister Netanyahu, "Take the win. Take the win,
That was
Bibi.
so horrible. Yes, I'm glad you mentioned
Don't do anything. Take the win." And well, we have to credit the armed forces of all these nations for being able to intercept and destroy almost all of the projectiles. This was not a win. This was not a win for Biden. He's been trying to prevent exactly this from happening for 6 months, and he failed. It's not a win for Israel. I mean, it was good that Israel intercepted these drones, but if nothing happens in response, Iran has established the predicate that it can launch attacks from its own soil and not be punished for it. So this is not a win, and it's only Biden's blinkered view of the world that would interpret it as such. So it's a very depressing moment, I have to say.
And the red line situation on that point, the red line parallel with Syria has another of these elements, which is when Obama made the argument for a strike in Syria in response to Bashar al-Assad using chemical weapons on his own population, including children, killing thousands. When Obama decided okay, the red line was crossed, so we got to do something. He sent Susan Rice out to make the argument in favor of a return strike. That never happened. We know obviously now that the red line, he backed off. But Susan Rice, the argument the Obama administration explicitly made was chemical weapons are different because if we allow their use anywhere, they put Americans and American soldiers and American troops in danger anywhere. That the idea was there's certain things we cast off the battlefield because their proliferation would suck the world into a very, very dark place, and their use without consequences in one place would mean their use in another place probably aimed at us. So it was made our security, in other words, American security depended on deterring the use of chemical weapons in Syria. If you put that to now what we're talking about with the Iranians and Iranian attack, if you don't deter the idea that you can shoot 200 ballistic missiles from your territory at another state, hitting along the way other states, where missiles fall short and stuff like that. This is an easy argument to make, and it is just as convincing as the chemical weapons argument in Syria, which is that if you let people think they can shoot from 1,000 miles away ballistic missiles at people, then that's going to put American troops in danger, not least because American troops were in the air defending against those missiles. If it happens again, presumably Americans in uniform will be up in the air again contesting with those missiles. So I don't understand why the argument isn't being made from the White House or anybody in it that acknowledging the fact that it's our security too here in America. And of the fuller Western coalition, this is not just about, although it's significant if it were to happen again, it's not just about what may happen again in Israel. This is the sort of thing that can change the game for the worse if we don't respond correctly.
Look, I mean, the through line between the Obama example that you point out and the past 3 some years under Biden is National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan, who in any other context would be catapulted from the White House back to, wherever he lives. Brookings, or, a ski chalet in Vermont or wherever. And long ago, after Afghanistan and the debacle there. And yet what's happened under this administration? You have Afghanistan, you have the failure of deterrence in Ukraine, you have the situation of October 7th, then you have the failure of deterrence in the greater Middle East with Iranian direct attack on Israel. And yet they view this as a win. That's what's so remarkable about Biden's statement, which, of course, is also exemplified in the actions of his national security advisor. There's no way in which this is a win. And in fact, everyone is talking about the tactical failure of the Iranian attack, but I have to wonder whether or not it was in some ways a strategic success. If the United States is able to deter Israel from responding, and look, right. It doesn't need to be a all-out assault right now, but if there's nothing happens in response, that is a strategic success for Iran because it is now dictating the pace of the region.
I am now willing to make a bet with anybody who wants to make the bet. Bets have to be painful, right? So I'm not quite sure what to bet so that, Israel will respond. There is no question that Israel will respond. Analogize it in any way, shape, or form. Okay, a bully comes after you, and you evade his punch. Right? You're on the schoolyard, and the bully throws a punch at you, and you evade it, and then he throws another one at you, and you evade it, and then he throws another one at you, and then he says, I'm never going to stop coming at you, and you don't punch him back. You have deterred nothing. Now, I think we're in danger of underrating two historic qualities that don't make this a loss for the United States or Israel. It's just a question of what happens now. One is, I am guessing that the Iranians are reeling in shock. They thought there is a weird argument that is now being thrown around that Iran did this on purpose. It didn't unleash itself fully. It did the least it could do. It warned the United States. It's testing Israeli capabilities. It's going to learn from what happened here. So the next time it does it, it will do it better. I'm sorry. That's nonsense. I mean, I appreciate the argument. I appreciate the idea that you want to assume that your rivals are playing 3D chess. Iran was just humiliated in the eyes of the world. It attacked Israel and nobody died. It sent hundreds of missiles and rockets and drones.
It's
and
severely injured. It severely injured a young Arab girl. Yeah, who happens to be Arab Israeli.
Yes.
Yeah.
Nobody died. They engaged with Israel for the first time in the 75-year history of Israel, and nobody died. And Israel said, don't you think you can hurl everything at us? And we just knocked it all out of the sky. That country is isolated, Iran. It has not fought in a conventional war in 30 years or 35 years. It didn't know how good its rockets were. It didn't know how good its missiles were. It didn't know if it has an effective military. It knows it has a really effective secret police force, and that it knows how to kill Iranians in the streets when they rise up against it. It knows how to manage proxies and pay them off and give them support. But it just was handed its hat in an incredibly public way, and people are already all too quick to dismiss the kind of shock and horror that I would say in Iran, I don't know if it parallels Israel's victory in 1967 against the other Arab countries, but there was a lot of chatter and talk right before June 1967 about how the Egyptians were going to crush the Israelis, and they were going to eat them alive, and they were going to leave them in tatters and ruins. And Israel destroyed Egypt's army in 6 days, and this assault, and took the Sinai, and sadly took Gaza, but took the Sinai as well. And the entire world suddenly looked at a paper tiger. Now I want to do a follow-up with this, which is why Israel has to strike, and which is, I think, everybody in Israel, once the dust settles, understands, which is that wasn't the end of it. The Egyptians licked their wounds, and the Syrians licked their wounds, and they tried to, and then 5 years later, 6 years later, they struck again, and they struck in a war that was vastly more destructive. Israel fell asleep at the switch.
A surprise attack.
This
was not a surprise attack.
No, exactly. They reconstituted their forces. They took lessons from what happened, and then they went again, which is why Israel has to hit Iran now, because the lesson of 67 was Israel can't take the win. You can't ever take the win. You take the win, they come at you again. You take the win in Gaza in 2011, they come at you in 2014. You take the win in Gaza in 2021, they invade in 2023. That's Israel's geopolitical lesson with its adversaries, and they are going to strike Iran. Biden can say whatever he wants, and the international community can counsel restraint and all of that. What I'm saying is what Israel learned after October 7th. There is no way that this government, the Israeli government, can survive not attacking Iran. The right wing in Bibi's government will collapse the government if they do not strike back against Iran. But that is my
so might Gantz and people to his left.
Right.
But it's not just attacking Iran. The bet that you proposed we can make in two places. We're still waiting to see what Israel's going to do about Rafah, right? The U.S. is holding Israel back in two places critical to its fight against Iran and its proxies and against securing the survival of its own existence, the survival of its own state. From Israel's perspective, this is crazy what it has to deal with the U.S. here. It's not letting them finish the job in Gaza. Then the prime minister has to take all this flack from the U.S. about how he needs to step down and he's destroying the country. Then it's not letting Israel fight back against the first direct attack from Iran ever. This is terrible, I think, actually.
Look,
so what's your wager, John?
My wager is that Israel will.
But what are you wagering? I know what you're betting. But I know the bet, but what are you going to wager? Do I get to do an extra recommends?
Wait, but I have a question.
You can do recommends anytime.
What's the form of the response?
John,
I don't know. I was going to talk about money, but I'm a little short on
How about
cash
embarrassing karaoke?
But hold on,
we all have to commit.
Okay, but I'm good at karaoke. That's the problem.
But let me try to make the bet more interesting conceptually here.
Okay,
is the bet that Israel will respond to Iran and go into Rafah? Or does it have to choose one now? Okay,
Israel is going into Rafah and Israel is going into Iran. Okay. But Iran, the thing about the Iran thing is, I don't know. Brett Stevens has a column today that says revenge is a dish best served cold. Israel needs to go into Iran, but it has to finish up in Gaza first. I actually don't think that is correct. I think that going after Iran strengthens Israel's hand in going into Rafah because, and excuse my French, it is time once again to scare the shit out of Hamas. Hamas has gotten, one of the ways in which Israel is losing deterrence against Hamas, even as it presses the war, is that Hamas is getting all of this weird support, semi-support at the negotiating table, and yet again, yesterday, rejected another ceasefire deal. I didn't even know they were still talking. This is now like the 6th ceasefire deal in 2 weeks that Hamas has rejected. Israel goes and bloodies Iran severely and then says, we are coming after you next, and we don't care what Washington says anymore. Washington told us not to do Iran, and we're doing it. And then now, stand down, surrender, run away, end your, or we are going to hang all of you from the yardarm. That is part of the deterrence or the war effort against Hamas.
No
If
free
they don't-
shots. That's
if
what you
they
said.
don't-
There's
yeah.
no free shots.
There's no free shots, and Israel is going to finish the jobs that it started.
All right, I'll take your bet.
You're going to say, okay,
Yeah,
so
the past weekend, I don't think I mean, Israel will blow up a Iranian nuclear scientist, sure, but what you're suggesting is not going to happen. Certainly not by certainly not by the election, American election.
You think that Israel will not?
It will not go into
military
Rafah,
strike,
and it will not conduct a military operation against Iran of the type that you're suggesting.
The Israeli government won't. The Israeli government won't survive that. So inevitably, it will. You see, because then the Israeli government will collapse, and the next Israeli government will do it.
Well, who's going to sink who's going to sink the government? John?
Ben Gvir and Smotrich will sink the government. They've said as much. They have both said as much now.
And also worth noting,
you have gone nihilistic on me.
I'm sorry.
Gantz has made indications toward accepting new election. He came out and said we want to elect.
You can't have an election until 26 without the government collapsing. So who's going to collapse the government?
I just told you who's going to collapse the government.
Do they think that they're better off in the new elections?
They have. When we see that the polling says that 80% of Israelis we know Israel wants them to go into Rafah, the Israeli public, and that they are going to want Israel to strike back against Iran. And they're not going to do it because they're afraid of the drooling, senile idiot in the White House who says,
Can I just add, by the way,
that's
can I just
not
add that
going to happen,
Haredi,
particularly if what's going to happen this week, the House is going to move $20 billion in aid to Israel by the end of the week. Is Biden going to oppose it?
No.
Okay, so
can I just add, by the way, the Haredi draft thing could bring down the government without Ben Gvir and without the war itself bringing it down. They're facing another internal crisis on this thrust upon them by the AG.
Right. Okay, that's true, but the collapse of the government, I'm just saying you have there's a hopelessness to your acceptance of my bet, Matt. And now I think we need to talk about some of these ideas that are floating around that I've already preemptively attacked, as Israel should preemptively attack, have preemptively attacked others. But various people, the Institute for the Study of War, our very good friends Fred and Kim Kagan, issued a report on Twitter in which they laid out the idea that this was a first salvo on the part of the Iranians to test and guide them in the next response to Israel, which will be much more directed and efficient. There is a line abroad among hawks and very right-wing people that, in fact, Biden somehow signaled to the Iranians that it would be okay for Iran to strike as long as the strike was ineffective, and that there's a conspiracy between America, Turkey, and Iran where we gave Iran the green light as long as the attack would fail. So Iran could say it attacked, and we could say that we said don't, and then they failed, and I don't know what the Turks get. Carolyn Glick is proposing this. Various people are suggesting that this is the case. And I'm sorry, but Jake Sullivan and Biden and Kamala Harris and Tony Blinken are too stupid to be able to come up with such a plot. This is a plot out of a, twisty international intrigue movie. And these people are running one of the dumbest foreign policies that we have ever seen, in which everything that they say they want, they don't get, and it goes awry. And so assuming that they stumbled into a successful successful military effort over a day, but that it's actually a failure, and they wanted it to be a failure, and they wanted Iran to fail, and Iran wanted to fail. When has a country launched a gigantic swarm of military responses with the goal of failing?
You said earlier that Iran is completely embarrassed and is reeling from this attack. It would have been more.
I don't know.
It would have been more embarrassed had it done nothing. Iran had to do something.
Mhm.
So last week we were talking about what it might do. And we were saying on the podcast that if it were to launch a direct attack against Israel, that would be a remarkable development in the history of the region. It would be an act of war on Iran's part against the state of Israel. It did that. I have to say, I was a little bit surprised. But it did it in such a way that the coalition was ready and prepared, and the CENTCOM commander was in Israel coordinating, and 99% of the projectiles were shot down. When Biden cut his weekend short, I said, you weren't there, but I did say, I have witnesses. I have alibis. I said, he's coming back to the White House to restrain Israel. That is his goal. Restrain Israel. Stop causing me trouble, Israel. And so far, he succeeded.
Okay, but that doesn't mean that the scenario that's being laid out, that Iran did this as a part of a longer term strategy where they were going to fight the first battle to lose in order to win the second battle. That is it's just too cute by half, and that the United States consciously knew that. What I think the United States was doing is signaling, as they did to the Russians before the Ukraine, for all the good it did them, that they have total visibility into Iran's high command. They were saying, don't think that you can be having a single conversation, not to refer to the three-body problem again, but I just think it's teaches us everything about everything. We have Sophons in the Iranian high command rooms. We know everything they're plotting. We know every conversation they're having with everybody. We're saying, we know you're going in 24 to 48 hours. We're sending our CENTCOM guy into the region to coordinate, because there is not a word or a thought that you're saying or a thought you're thinking that we don't know. Now it's time for you to have a psychotic hunt for the moles, or figure out where we put the bugs in the wall, or something like that. That's part of the psychological warfare.
John,
yeah.
As with the run up to this, when the U.S. knew that Putin was going to invade Ukraine, Biden spoke in terms of, when asked what the response should be, there was a lot of, well, it depends on the size of the attack. It depends what we're talking about here. It depends what kind of invasion Putin's talking about here. That's not unlike the theories that people are floating about this.
I also think that the deterrence by disclosure has failed now twice, and it's failed because it operates on a completely incorrect liberal understanding of psychology. Liberals think that if you just feel the shame and guilt, if they can just guilt you and shame you into not act, we know what you're about to do. Shouldn't you feel terrible about? We know, Putin. We know all your plans. So you should just act like a 21st century person and take the off ramp that we've provided. We know Iran. We know exactly how far your Shahed drone's range is. So you should act like us, and then everything will be okay. It doesn't work like that. They don't care whether we know or not. In fact, they want us to know because they want us to be scared.
Right. So Israel has to scare them back. That's
yes, it does.
Specifically testing boundaries. They are specifically trying to test those boundaries as children do. They are, we see what you're going to do. Don't do it. Is the fact that we know is part of the calculus, because they need to know how far they can push.
Okay, I'm reminded. I like this analogy because I'm reminded of the fact that when my kids were very little, we sent them this kind of touchy-feely 2-year-olds program, and the whole question was, how do you deal with them when they do wrong, or when they're about to do wrong, or they're about to be a bully or something like that. And one of the pieces of advice we were given was to say, in order to deconflict, really,
Right.
as a form of deconfliction, you say
Use
to
your
them
words, not your
with a big
drones.
smile. No, you say, "I know what you're doing."
Right.
You're kidding. Well, that is
I
both
know-
creepy and ineffective.
I know what you're doing.
Yeah, I know.
So we're like, "I know what you're doing," and they're like, "Yeah, we're mass murderers.
We
You
keep
know what we're
telling you
doing?
that.
Watch us while we try to commit mass murder. We're not kidding around. You think we're 2 years old? We are way older than you." There's an interesting aspect of both Iranian and Russian policy toward the United States, I think, at least retort in their own heads. We think, look, we're America. We've been around for 240 years. We have the oldest surviving single form of government next to Switzerland on the planet Earth. You know, we are aged. We've won world wars. We know things. We are part of the community. And then Iran's like, hey, we're Shia, and we've been at this since 2 generations after Muhammad, and we are part of the religion and that stormed through the West and got to the gates of Vienna, and you are a bunch of pipsqueak, arrogant know-it-alls, and we are going to spit in your faces. And Russia's like, and Putin has this whole mythological thing. We've been around since Kievan Rus in the 10th century AD. We are one with our own history, and you're just a couple of Aravists who don't have the will or the means to follow through and put your money where your mouth is. Want to treat us like children? Want to treat us like children? We're gonna
The
show
naughty
you
corner
what
doesn't
happens.
work.
Yeah, but by the way,
like children.
who's the only ally that we have who can make similar claims to antiquity? Much longer claims.
Much longer
to
claims.
to
That's
being
right.
people, right?
That's right. Anyway,
Israel,
so,
which is why I think that they are the spine of all this.
Look,
on our
Bibi
side.
felt it necessary. Bibi felt it necessary on Saturday night, talking to Biden, to hold back at that moment, or with the work, to hold back because there was something he heard in Biden's tone or something where the instantaneous response was imprudent. By the way, an important point Seth was making on Twitter, we got to make again. People have this psychotic idea that Bibi is like a psychotic cowboy who just shoots first and asks questions later. He is the most cautious Israeli leader there has ever been. He always tries to do half measures rather than full measures so that he can have negotiating room to back out. It is the nature of his leadership over 14 years that he has done this in every possible way. It is one of the reasons that history is going to judge him harshly on October 7th, because he used half measures 4 times against Gaza and left Hamas intact to do October 7th because he didn't close the circle. And now, again, there's going to be this, is Bibi going to be a cowboy? Israel needs restraint. That is the nature of Bibi, to pursue restraint rather than assault. But the logic of what happened here, he said, if you hurt us, we hurt you. He said that on Wednesday. Maybe you could make the claim that he could say, well, they didn't really hurt us. But of course, he cost them $1 billion. He cost them 5 billion shekels.
They had to shut down the
Iranians,
airport.
Yeah. And the cost Americans a lot. It was very expensive what we did.
For us too, yes. But Israel spent 5 billion shekels on Saturday defending the homeland. That's why you spend the money to have the stuff, but now you have to replenish it. That's a lot of money to a small country. And so they were hurt, even if people didn't die, except this horrible circumstance involving the little Bedouin girl. So Don't is going to have, I think, unlike you, Matt, Don't is going to have the same effect that it had on Iran and that it had on Putin, which is Israel is going to go into Rafah and it's going to hit Iran very hard.
I hope you're right.
The sad part is, imagine a world in which America decided to make Iran an example pre the next 25 years with China. if America went in with Israel, John Bolton suggested this, on striking Iran's nuclear sites and disabling its nuclear sites. We can do that pretty easily. We have bunker buster bombs and things like that where we can take out the Natanz facility. Israel does not have the same capability. Imagine a world in which we said this cannot stand, this country is willing to do anything and everything. The next time they might generate the plutonium necessary to put it in a bomb and send it toward Israel, and then we have nuclear exchanges and the world changes utterly. So we're going to join in with Israel and take out Iran's nuclear capacity. Again, I know it's science fictional.
That's what we should be doing.
But it shouldn't be science fictional at all. It should be option. You have 4 options on the table. It should be one of the options. Instead, clearly, Biden is going to go for the idea that after Iran did this, now he's got to manage Israel and hold them back. And Seth, just so we end up here, you have a very, very good blog post, and you point out that Israel was put into a Hobson's choice position the last time that it was struck from sovereign territory, that is from Iraq during the Gulf War, when Scud missiles were sent at Israel, and the United States prevented Israel from responding to Iraq's launching, was it 42? I think 42 Scuds, which they did not know. They didn't know whether or not the Scuds had chemical weapons on them. So the normal thing for them to do would have been to go and strike Iraq, which we know they knew how to do because they blew up the Iraqi nuclear reactor 10 years earlier. But George H.W. Bush said, don't you do anything. We'll hit you tell us whatever site you want us to hit, we'll hit for you. You cannot respond. And so serious was this idea that Israel's participation would break the international coalition that Bush had assembled to fight Iraq, that he said, not only will not provide you with the information to let you know where the American warcraft are, where the Allied warcraft are, so that you're on your own. Like, you might hit an American plane and then God knows what happens to you then. So it not only said it actually threatened Israel with saying Israel might commit suicide if it did what it was going to do. And Yitzhak Shamir, then the prime minister, what happened then?
Shamir stood down and said, okay. I mean, he was put in this position where the cost of response was seen by Yitzhak Shamir, who was not a dove, by the way. We should just go on to say, an old dove. Likudnik. I mean, he was like to Begin's right in the Likud coalition. This was and so he had people in his government like Moshe Aaron's start to draw up possible ways of responding, right? You have to have plans just in case, right? You have to be able to present the prime minister with, well, if you decide to say yes, here's what we would do. And the Bush administration played these ridiculous games with Aaron's where they would not pick up the phone, and then they would say, all right, we're sending a liaison. They would say, and then the liaison didn't go. Oh, we had to send him here because this happened. We're sending another liaison. It was like they were ghosting Israel on that front, along the lines of what you mentioned about we're not going to tell you where the planes are, right? It was like a communications blackout. Right. It wasn't just, here's where we are, I don't want to see you anywhere near that. It was, we're not talking to you about this. We're not, it's like, again, with the parents and child, it's like, I'm not talking about this anymore. This conversation is over. And so Shamir was left in a place where he was just sitting in a dark cave. And anything he did presumably carried a lot of risk because of the refusal to communicate over all these basic avenues by George H.W. Bush and James Baker. And so he was getting pressure from inside his government, but he stood fast and said, okay, there's really not much we can do. But Shamir's argument to his government and to the Israelis was, we'll at least win points. We'll win brownie points with Bush.
And then what
He's
happened?
going to
Okay.
And then
Now let's talk about the historical memory of the Israelis, and that has very much to do, and Bibi, very much to do with what is going on now and why I think Matt's pessimism in an odd way is unwarranted. So Israel stood down. It did what America wanted. And what happened? The Bush administration, after the war, started showing a new level of contempt toward Israel. Not a respect, not a sense that Israel had played the game as it was supposed to. They convened a peace conference in Madrid with the Palestinians and others to a grand solution. Now that this war had been won over Saddam Hussein, remember how we won a war with Saddam Hussein? He never bothered us again. That was really another half measure, American half measure.
Case closed.
So
and he told the Israelis, we're going to withhold, if you don't show up to this conference, we're going to withhold loan guarantee.
Yeah, you have to go to the conference. The conference is the beginning, even though administrations change, of the Oslo peace process. It brings the Palestinians as a political force to the negotiating table as its own entity, pretty much for the first time in history. And 2 years later, they're on the White House lawn, and Yitzhak Rabin looks nauseous and enraged as he shakes Yasser Arafat's hand, and the Oslo Accords are born. And Israel, that happened to Israel and then the Oslo process turned into a nightmare. Rabin is assassinated. The Intifada, peace measures are offered. The Intifada starts. The terror war starts. That all stems from the initial decision by Shamir not to respond to the Scuds. I don't know that he had another choice. But in 2024, Israel has a multiplicity of choices that do not involve the United States. Democratic Party has already turned its polling. The polling shows the Democrat has already turned on Israel and now favors Palestinians over Israel.
And two other things along that go along those lines. One is that the terror, if people don't remember, in the Gulf War of the Scuds, more people in Israel, I believe, died from taking anti-nerve gas, anti-nerve agent medication, because they didn't know what was in. Nobody knew for sure if there were going to be chemical weapons as part of that. People died because they thought they were going to be gassed.
2 people were killed in the Scud attacks. About 100 buildings were, were damaged by the Scud attacks. 200 people were injured, and I think 12 died from taking anti-chemical nerve agents as prophylactics.
It was terrifying. The terror of that, and then over the weekend, over the weekend, I had friends who were showing videos, and of Saturday night, and the Israelis were again the terror. People are acting like, but you have to remember that the population doesn't just sit there and say, "Oh, well, it's a fireworks show."
Yeah. Anyway, it's very important to note that this is part of Israel's political DNA, that the relationship with the United States is vitally and crucially important, and that presidents treat Israel like shit and have been treating Israel like shit intermittently. I have a piece in Commentary, you can read it, called Israel's Splendid Isolation, that's on our website at commentary.org, that goes through some of this history. The American people like Israel. America is Israel's only reliable ally. Presidents tend not to like Israel because it won't just do what they tell it, or if it does, it happens after a long time of being irritated. And this is happening now. And the Israeli populace's interests now are totally divergent from the Biden administration's interests. And Bibi would like nothing more than to have a good relationship with Biden. And that will now be impossible. It's already 75% impossible, but at least they were able to deal with what went on in the last week. But that divergence is coming, I believe. Matt doesn't believe it. We have a bet,
and we're going to bet a Frappuccino.
All right, that's a wonderful thing to bet. And now we haven't even talked about Trump's trial. What is there to say? So maybe we'll talk about it tomorrow. I have nothing to say about it. It's Trump versus Michael Cohen in the battle of the scumbags. So God only knows what's going to happen. But Matt, you're
Yes.
here with
Thank
the
you.
commentary recommends.
Thank you, John. Today, I would like to recommend 2 new books by long time commentary contributor Joseph Epstein. I reviewed both of these books over the weekend in the Wall Street Journal. Joe Epstein has authored an autobiography, Never Say You've Had a Happy Life, especially if you have had a happy life. That is out, and accompanying it is a new essay collection called Familiarity Breeds Content. Not contempt, but content or content. And they're both wonderful introductions to Epstein. If you were unfamiliar with him, commentary readers, of course, already know what they're going to get, which on the one hand is a lovely, elegant tale of his life, his 87 years. And then on the essay collection, kind of a greatest hits of familiar essays combined with some more recent work, much of which appeared in our pages. So that's my recommendation this week. 2 new books by Joseph Epstein.
I believe, if I have this right, Abe, that Joseph Epstein's first piece for commentary appeared in 1963. Might have been 1962 or 1963. And of course, I think he had a piece in our March issue. So just to give you a sense,
Yeah.
he has been writing for commentary for 61 years. And I'm going to have we'll have more to say about him in due course, not just about this book, but about the semi-valedictory that these 2 books seem to represent. But thank you. And people should look up Matt's piece in the Journal because it's a really beautiful summation of his of Epstein's life and career. So we'll be back tomorrow for Abe, Christine, Seth, and Matt. I'm John Podhoretz. Keep the candle burning.